if we can pull ourselves back to listen and try to find the real problem, most of the time diffuses a lot of misunderstandings. A lot of times when you have an assumption and then you bring that conversation down the road, you'll be trying to fix that misunderstanding rather than solving the problem in itself.
Hello and welcome to the Connect to Marriage podcast. I am Delia and I am your host for this episode. In each episode of the Connect to podcast, we'll be tackling questions that couples ask about marriage, communication, conflict, and so much more. We hope you will keep tuning in to learn with us as you grow closer, deeper, and stronger in your marriage. Many seasoned couples will tell you that the first year of marriage is the hardest. But what if we could make it a little easier by learning from those who have been there? What do seasoned couples wish they knew when they first said, I do? In this first episode of a two-part series, we will hear from our guests, Ernest and Elyna, as they give us an insider's look into their lives. We'll explore the invaluable lessons and tips that can help newlyweds navigate those early days of married life a little easier. Welcome to the Connect to podcast, Ernest and Elyna. Hi!
Hi!
Okay, to start us off, share with our listeners how you first met and how long you have been married.
Hi everyone, my name is Ernest. I'm 37 this year and I'm founder of a few F&B companies. One is serving food, and another one is providing software for restaurants as well. We've been married for 2.5 years, but if we wind back time, we met online actually. We met on a Coffee Meets Bagel. We spent 2 years dating with each other. That happened actually during COVID period as well. We had a journey to really understand how we fit in each other's lives. And yeah, that's how we met each other.
My name's Elyna. I'm 36 this year, and I'm a founder of the company called The Infinite Collective. It's a company that helps people, organizations, and communities unlock and unleash their fullest potential.
Lovely to meet you guys, Ernest and Elyna, and I am excited to hear more about your journey together because it does sound like it took quite a bit of courage, to even plunge into building that friendship first after getting to know each other online, and then thereafter make that commitment to say that you'll spend your lifetime together. And now having been married for 2 years, I'm curious to know, what was your first year of marriage like, and if there was any highlights and low points that you have encountered.
I think if there's one word I would use to describe it, I'd actually say it was exciting. It was such a season of change. Everything changes, once you move out of your parents' house, it's starting our own home and, just figuring out how we wanted to do things. I feel like it was such an exciting adventure, just with a clean slate to figure things out, experiment with things.
Yeah, for myself, I actually didn't go in with that much expectations. For myself, I felt like it's actually a commitment to figure things out. Because a lot of times, a lot of our preconceived ideas before marriage will only be tested when we actually live it out. So for myself, I think it was really just the commitment to see and try, and learn, and to just make mistakes at the same time, but really just commit to learn and improve along the way.
Wow, that's a very grounded response from you, Ernest, because I think many times people do enter marriage with a very romanticized and grandiose image of what married life will look like, especially what they coin to be the honeymoon phase of the newlywed stage. Yeah, and I think hearing the two perspectives, I could hear also as well that Elyna was looking forward to carving out a new season together as you step into life as one. And I'm just curious, even though, Ernest, you shared that you didn't come in with much expectations, but if you could just share some thoughts about what helped you both to prepare even before making that commitment. What did you do together?
We did a lot of conversations. So one of the things that was a hallmark of our relationship is conversations. Really enjoy talking about life, talking about what life could be. And we also enjoy talking about how we want life to be run, right? Like, I think this spans across even how we would eventually want to run our family, how we want to raise our children, and even topics like our own upbringing, because these affect how we think, how we process, and as well as how we want to propagate some of the values that we have in our lives. So I think conversation was a very key piece. And the second one was actually marriage preparation, which actually surfaced a lot of crucial topics that we never really thought about. And I think it gave us time to really process and question certain things that we may have taken for granted.
It's so true. This process, it starts early. For us, it was a really important part of our dating life as well, making sure that we had that alignment of values and just starting to suss out what we actually wanted, what our view of success was for married life. I think that started before we got married, marriage prep was an incredibly important part of that for us as well. I think the safe space that it gives you to talk really vulnerably about things that you might otherwise feel quite uncomfortable to bring up in normal conversation was really, really powerful.
I mean, if you could share about how some of the things that were spoken about pre-married and coming into marriage and then living it out, as what Ernest just now alluded to earlier on, was there something in particular that you observed having had those conversations helped you to prepare for those situations when it arose?
I think for myself, one of the clear ones that I think was helpful for us was to discuss about conflict resolution. When things turn south and like when expectations are not met, how do we resolve conflict? What are our tendencies? What do we really care about at the root of things, so that when arguments happen or when quarrels happen, how do we de-escalate things? How do we not say things that are hurtful? And how do we not like make regretful decisions?
Yeah, to build on that, I think a subset of that is really about communication. And I think, as we were going through all of the different topics, we were talking about finances, kids, household chores, all of these things. And we realized that actually we did have quite a lot of differences. While we had a lot of shared values, because of our different upbringings, we had different expectations of, what the future would hold. But what was really powerful was starting to figure out our communication styles. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from marriage prep was that actually we had quite a complementary communication style. And when we tie that to, as Ernest mentioned, conflict resolution, that became really, really powerful. Because the truth of the matter is, in pre-marriage, you can discuss all of these things, but when the rubber hits the road, it's a whole different story. And while those things, they do help to prepare you, what we really needed was really that alignment on communication and conflict resolution, which is something that helps you continue on that journey of learning, of communication and alignment, which has to continue well beyond, marriage prep, but really throughout the rest of your married life as well.
Oh, that's so good. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Elyna, because you are right to say that many couples step into marriage feeling prepared and ready to work out the differences and wanting to adapt to one another. But I think sometimes the realization that, hey, it's not just going to be a one-time thing, but it's going to be an ongoing process of really working through these differences, really sometimes having to embrace some of the idiosyncrasies, or even just learning how to adapt to the different seasons of each other's lives because of whether it's work stresses or demands with regards to our family, caregiving arrangements, etc. That could actually make it even more complex when it comes down to expressing these commitments. So is there something in particular that you could share with the listeners, having experienced your first year in marriage, this part about conflict resolution? Maybe it's an incident or something that you have gone through together as a couple, and you felt that if a younger couple were to hear this, would feel encouraged as they go through that.
It really depends on the personalities of the couple. But for myself, based on my experience, a lot of times when we end up in a place where there's indifference, there's differences in how we think about like certain topics or even like incidents. I've learned that listening and active listening is one of the key things, because when somebody is bringing up a topic to talk about, or in this case, Elyna is talking about why something happened and stuff like that, I think there's a very gut reaction to react very quickly. But I think maybe also because in work I've been conditioned, I've sort of trained myself to take a step back, really try to understand why is she bringing this topic up. And I think it helps to paraphrase and just re-emphasize, are you saying this? And just help also Elyna to listen to what she's saying as well. So sometimes she's like, no, actually, I'm not saying this. I'm actually saying that. And that helps me clarify what she's actually trying to drive across. So if we can pull ourselves back to listen and try to find the real problem, most of the time diffuses a lot of misunderstandings. A lot of times when you have an assumption and then you bring that conversation down the road, you'll be trying to fix that misunderstanding rather than solving the problem in itself.
Oh, that's really interesting. Elyna, at the receiving end of what Ernest attempts to do, trying to practice active listening, how do you find that has helped you in relating to him?
Marriage is one of the most rewarding things in life. Yet, navigating marriage as newlyweds or an engaged couple can sometimes get overwhelming. Whether it's managing expectations of the in-laws, getting a good grasp of your family finances, or establishing good habits of communication and healthy conflict. Focus on the Family Singapore's marriage preparation program aims to help you build a solid foundation in the early years and prepare you for the adventure of your life. Visit family.org.sg/C2 Marriage Prep for more information today.
I feel like it's been so powerful. A lot of the time, marriage, it's such an emotional thing. You know, when your lives are so closely intertwined, you can't help but have an emotional response to things sometimes because it's so close to your heart. You know, when you are feeling emotional about things, sometimes you can get lost in that as well. And so it's been so helpful. And it's something that I really appreciate because, you know, you can try to address issues at a symptomatic level. But the challenge with that is then the issues still keep bubbling up after that. And it's similar, but slightly different. And that's where it starts to get tiring because you feel like, oh, why do we keep hitting these roadblocks? But actually, building this habit and this rhythm of taking that step back, delving deeper to understand what the problem is, what we manage to do is it helps us to actually over time even start avoiding some of these conflicts from even happening because we're really getting to the root of it. And it's been a blessing. Yeah.
Wow, I mean, actually what you just said is something that we can all learn. When we listen to understand instead of listening to respond. Because many times, as what Ernest said, if we come in from a defensive point of view, when we hear our spouse telling us something or sharing an incident with us, if we try to take on a problem-solving stance or trying to, defend ourselves or speak up for ourselves, we are not seeking to understand the underlying concern that our spouse might be having, seeking to understand the emotions that might be causing these concerns to be rising up. And to hear Ernest say that, hey, I actually want to take a step back first, to even delve deeper, to even ask more questions, to even seek to understand helps. And it's encouraging to hear you share as well, Elyna, that over time it has also given the both of you that synergy as a team to help one another either overcome certain pitfalls or avoid these situations from occurring again. So thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I think that is a very practical way that we can try to apply in our own marriage as well. I heard you share that from the start, you already involved people in your lives to seek support and counsel, even before you had chosen to step into marriage. And that is something that is helpful for couples because sometimes in the context of getting to know one another and even living life together, it is helpful to have someone else to bounce off, right? Could you share with our listeners why seeking support from others can be helpful in the context of marriage?
Well, I feel that having community with shared values is really important. People who you can seek counsel from, it's really valuable because when we deal with issues in isolation, I think problems can start to feel a lot larger than they actually are. And it's very easy to also start to spiral sometimes into negative or familiar patterns of thinking that may not actually be that healthy. I feel that when we can have people and community that we can confide in, I think sometimes it does help to sort of normalize some of these issues that married couples face. Because at the end of the day, while every couple is different, there are some similarities. So if we can learn, why wouldn't we, try seek out that opportunity to learn and spare ourselves, hopefully, some mistakes that we can avoid. But I think with that, though, I do feel that it's a bit of a double-edged sword. There is huge benefit to it. Also, going into seeking counsel from other couples, it's also really important to remember that, as we said earlier, every couple is different. And, the same way we want to learn from what has worked from other people, I think there's also sometimes the risk of taking on the perspective that things that haven't worked for them will not work for us as well. And taking on the expectation of negative outcomes for certain things as well. At the end of the day, as a couple, we're different. I think sometimes you can get a little bit jaded, when you hear about things that haven't worked with other people, they say, men are just like this. But, the truth is we don't need to take on that narrative. And I think it's important for us to also guard our minds and our hearts so that we don't fall into those traps of getting jaded. And we can still see the potential and the possibilities in our own marriages.
I believe that great marriages don't work in isolation. The principle is that we need to surround ourselves with people who love us. And because they love us, they see things that we may not be able to see. and may be able to just warn, give advice, or just speak life to us in areas that we may not be aware of at that point of time. And I think even in the process of dating, even in the process of leading up to marriage and even post-marriage, I think having people in your life who can really see and love you and identify some of the gaps and give you perspective, I think that's definitely a lot more precious. And it forces you to think not just from your own standpoint, but also take a little bit of a step back to see the wider picture of things. So I do feel that a community or even a support group, friends who really care about you, make a huge difference in this.
I think beyond having people who are intentionally speaking into your life, I think something that's been really powerful for us is to have role model couples in our lives as well. You know, people who we respect and look up to for different reasons. And what's been really powerful about that is just taking the intentional step to observe, learn, and take and adapt what we see works well from these different couples. You know, for some people, it might be the way that they bring up their kids. Some people, it's the way they run their homes. Some people, it might be the way they balance work and marriage. But, you know, taking different elements of these things that resonate with us and like the values that we would like to hold in our marriage as well, and learning from that. And I think sometimes that really powerfully comes even simply just from observing diverse couples out there, seeing what you want for your marriage, but also the things that, you know, maybe you don't want for your marriage, so that we can be intentional about kind of designing the type of marriage that we want to have.
Yeah, that's so encouraging, because what I draw out from what you have shared, both Ernest and Elyna, is the idea that while there's no like manual to marriage per se because of the uniqueness that each of you bring into your marriage, but yet at the same time there are some principles that can be drawn out from lived examples and how that can be adapted to the context that you are in. Particularly, for example, both of you are running your own businesses, you have your different responsibilities, and at the same time, your own unique mix of your personalities, interests, and goals. And how might that look like in terms of the weaving together in the context of your marriage? Another thing that I'm hearing you share as well, Elyna, is the idea that while we are selective about the examples that we learn from, it is also important for the listeners to remember that it's also not about comparing. Because sometimes we might look at models and we think to themselves, why is my marriage not this way? It may seem very nice or perfect on the veneer, but it is also important that when you get to know the couples in person and really experience the sharing of lives, that you really discover that everyone would have their fair share of struggles living out this commitment, recognizing that not everything will be smooth sailing, but there will be situations whereby we would need to work out these differences, and this will only come up in actual conversations that we share with the couples that we choose to learn from. So in every podcast, we address a frequently asked question that couples have about marriage. So today, Elyna and Ernest, we invite you to respond to the question from one of our listeners. She asks, "My husband and I just got married 3 months ago, and we have been adapting to each other's preferences, needs, and learning to do life together. One of the roadblocks we have faced is trying to strike a balance between maintaining our individual identities while building a life together. Could you provide practical tips on how we can support each other's personal goals, dreams, and interests while still finding time to nurture our marriage relationship?"
I personally believe that it's important to remember that our individuality should not come at a compromise of the unit of the family. And while we have the freedom to do what we want, it can and sometimes will hurt others in the process if done selfishly. If you value your marriage, you will need to often make sacrifices not to put your individual identity above the collective identity. And our freedom is not just a choice, but an asset. Just like finances, our marriage is a shared account where we choose to invest in it or grow it. But at the same time, we can also choose to draw down from that marriage instead and then use it on ourselves. And this chips away at the shared reserve, and over time, it can reduce it to nothing, and that's where problems arise. I've also always believed that partnerships exist in 2 levels. The first, where partners face inwards, contend with their individuality against each other, trying to find a balance in their lives. But there exists a second level where partners face outwards, back against each other, trying to find harmony and support each other in their lives. When I first met Elyna, I told her, this is my vision of how a marriage should be, right? And I don't want to remain in level 1 very long. We may be in level 2, but sometimes when we have quarrels or stuff, and we end up in a level 1 type of a conversation, we know that we want to move very quickly back into a level 2 relationship.
No, 100%. I think what's really important for us has been to be really clear on what success looks like as a unit. You know, when we're single, we're living our own lives, our definition of success is very different, and rightly so. But, you know, when we make this choice to get married, I think what's really valuable is to start to think about the synergies and the greater value that we can actually create together as a team. And it's about not just about discarding all of your personal goals, but it's looking at how can we together better support each other to achieve our goals individually and as a collective. And so practical tips, for us, we started these conversations actually very early. Like Ernest mentioned, early on in our dating, he already shared his perspectives. I shared mine about the type of partnership we wanted. So we knew that this wasn't going to happen just naturally. You need to be intentional about it. And so right after we got married, one of the first things we did was we had a little bit of like a mini offsite, and we sat down and we started mapping out. Maybe it's an occupational hazard, but it was really, really helpful for us, because what we did was we started to map out what are our individual goals? Where do we see synergies in the visions that we have in our lives or the callings that we feel that we have in our lives? How do they come together? And how can we start to support them? And from there, what was really exciting was we started to build couple goals as well. Then it wasn't just about me against you and how we figured these out, but there was a shared vision we were working towards. And it met both of our dreams and hopes, which I think was really powerful because, as Ernest meant, that it puts you on the same team and you're supporting each other as you fight this battle out there in the world. And I think that's been really, really powerful for us.
Wow, I think it's really encouraging to hear how you both have been really intentional in the way that you articulate to one another your dreams and your goals. And it does sound like because of the starting point that you had in terms of recognizing that once you have committed your lives to each other, it is not just about seeking out your individual goals, but it's also about having a shared goal together as a married couple, and how the sum of the parts is lesser than the sum of the whole. Yeah, and I think it is powerful because now you have two individuals who have synergized your strengths and your giftings in a way that can also benefit the people that you get to serve and interact with. And I think it does sound like your offsites are not just going to be a one-time thing, but probably some regular check-ins is required to see how you have been progressing. And probably, I take myself for example, we do have a quarterly check-in into how we are doing, and annually we also review how the past year has been, and we look ahead as well. And I think that has been helpful for my marriage because that helps us to also look ahead in terms of growth, recognizing that we have a lifetime ahead of us and there is this shared excitement also as we look ahead. So thank you so much, Ernest and Elyna, for sharing your journey and tips to glean over the first year of your marriage. And I'm truly looking forward to part 2 because we will get a chance to talk more about managing finances and division of labor in the household. So in each podcast, we end off with a couple challenge for couples to do and share with one another. And if you are listening to this with your spouse, we invite you to participate with us. What brings to memory the most recent challenge you and spouse had to work through? Take time to recall how both of you navigated through that and celebrate the small win by planning a mini celebration for each other. For example, go for an ice cream or coffee date, go for a movie night, or maybe a DIY spa at home. And if you have been wanting to take a spouse on a date but haven't found the time to plan something meaningful, I invite you to visit www.family.org.sg/bestdateever to find out more about the event that we have in September. You don't want to miss it. Thank you for tuning in, and don't forget to stay tuned for the next episode.